The Evil Dead franchise isn't your typical churn them out almost yearly series like Friday the 13th in the 80s or Saw in the early 2000s. Over the course of 40 plus years, it has actually taken its sweet time delivering a hell of a trilogy, a remake, and a pretty okay movie that resides in the same universe as the original films. That doesn't even include its way better than we deserve TV series, comics, video games, toys, and other varying merch that was smattered into the world over the years. Evil Dead 2 sits in a precarious position of being the middle film of the trilogy. And while the first one is pure horror and Army of Darkness delves into the fantasy sci-fi action genre, Evil Dead 2 felt the need to really toe the line between horror and comedy. Today on 80s Horror Memories, we will see why Evil Dead 2 is such an important and enjoyable movie almost 4 decades later.
Swallow this.
In the great John Cusack vehicle from 2000, High Fidelity, the main characters have a discussion on what the word yet means, and plug in Evil Dead 2 as the source.
Just come on, what would it mean to you, that sentence? I haven't seen Evil Dead 2 yet.
Well, to me it would mean that you're a liar.
It's a bit where John Cusack's character Rob is asking his employee Barry, played by Jack Black, if the yet in the sentence means he was planning on seeing it. He's using the movie as a placeholder for what his ex-girlfriend may or may not do with a new man. But the exchange is great as Barry talks at length about how good the movie is in all aspects.
It's so funny and violent and the soundtrack kicks fucking ass.
And he's not wrong. It's nearly a perfect recommendation, but let's look at how it got there. Evil Dead is the 1981, or 1983, well, both, horror classic that Sam Raimi and his family and friends made based on their shorter film, Within the Woods. It took blood, sweat, and tears to make, and you can watch our other 80s horror memory all about it to learn much more. It made waves and even a decent amount of money, while also gaining a fairly famous and important fan and horror author and legend, Stephen King. This was crucial, as Raimi couldn't come up with the money, and King was able to help out in that department, which would lead to Raimi appearing in the King miniseries adaptations, The Stand and The Shining.
Well, you know, the funny thing about Evil Dead was I couldn't wait to see it. I couldn't wait to see it. You know, I think the big thing, and Sam Raimi always jokes about the fact that they ran into Stephen King on the streets in New York and asked him to come in and watch the movie and give them a quote. And the quote on the movie poster is the most ferociously original horror movie ever made. That was on the movie poster.
The movie opens with a slightly different version of the first film, which led to some confusion. Is this the same guy? Why does he keep going back to this cabin? Well, the first part of the movie serves as an almost soft remake of its predecessor. Ash takes his girlfriend Linda on a weekend date to an isolated cabin where he finds and listens to the tapes of Professor Noby and inadvertently unleashes an ancient evil. Different things happen from the first film, including there only being 2 people to start with instead of 5. But it feels like Evil Dead, at least mostly. While it is certainly still horrifying, there's also a bit of humor sprinkled in there. That's what makes this movie so accessible. My brother gave me a large chunk of my movie education, particularly in the horror department. And within the realm of horror, he knew exactly how to approach what I could view and when I could take it. With Freddy, it was Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Halloween, it was Part 2, and for the Evil Dead series, he went backward. This was really helpful for me, and he learned from past mistakes, as both Halloween 2 and Nightmare on Elm Street 3 were probably a little too much for me in the scares department. Nightmare in particular is when I remember not being able to sleep for at least a couple of nights. With Raimi and Company's excellent trilogy of films, I saw Army of Darkness first, but then when I loved it, I was shown the glory of one of the more famous examples of slapstick. That genre may have been used heavily by Peter Jackson in his early output, but it was perfected in 1987 with Evil Dead 2. Its mix of extensive gore, scares, and humor has yet to be matched, and probably never will be. The special effects that mix in everything from stop motion to trickery to good old-fashioned on-screen practical effects never cease to amaze, and are a wonder to look at on screen. Bruce Campbell's physical comedy and acting throughout make it an almost live-action cartoon, with the over-the-top violence to match. When he is laughing and swaying with the lamp while the rest of the cabin laughs at him, or when he's fighting his own possessed hand while it's still attached, there are examples throughout the medium that can stack up against that in terms of the commitment and showmanship. Bruce himself has often said that it's his favorite film of the trilogy that they made.
Weirdly enough, with my career, I've found myself working on sequels to movies that inspired me or changed the direction in my career. You know, working on Day of the Dead was the sequel to still my favorite movie. And then having a chance to work on Evil Dead 2. And then subsequently, I worked on a couple Halloween movies. I worked on a couple Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I worked on a couple Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. So weirdly enough, I found myself like the Forrest Gump of special effects makeup, because I ended up not only having a chance to stand on set with filmmakers like Wes Craven and George Romero and John Carpenter, but collaborate with them in a way that I would have never imagined when I was 15 or 16 or 17, seeing their movies and being terrified that I would ever be that kid that would be sitting at a meeting with Wes Craven talking about horror movies.
The idea of the sequel was initially thrown around during the filming of the first movie, where they wanted the concept to be Ash getting sucked through a portal and sent back in time to fight Deadites, along with Knights. It would be called Evil Dead 2, Evil Dead and the Army of Darkness. But that fell through. Raimi would make the movie Crime Wave, which was a massive flop, and ended up losing his financing for the proposed sequel. After conversations with some producers, they were greenlit, but the request was that the movie be much more similar to the first film. Another reason why the first part of Evil Dead 2 is a loose remake of its predecessor. Of course, the concept of Ash going through time would live on, and as this movie ends, the third sequel, Army of Darkness, was set up and eventually came to fruition. While the movie was requested to be similar to the first one, there are definitely differences, particularly in tone. The first Evil Dead is a lot of things, but funny is not one of them. Evil Dead 2 was written by Sam Raimi and Scott Spiegel, and the humor may have been in part due to where they were when writing it. Spiegel himself was influenced heavily by the old Popeye cartoons, the Three Stooges, particularly their slapstick behavior.
I will show you the Stooges.
And the hamburger helper mascot? Yes, he had made a short film about it in his teens called Attack of the Helping Hand that pretty much helped write the scenes with Ash's hand being taken over by the evil in the woods. While the rest of the cast is serviceable in their roles, of admittedly mostly archetypes and caricatures, it's Bruce and Ted Raimi who steal the show. Ash is one of the most beloved horror characters of all time, but do not sleep on Raimi, who puts in an outrageously entertaining turn as the Deadite resurrected Henrietta Nobi, who resides in the basement. This is a step up from his role in the first movie, which was credited as Fake Shemp, showing that Spiegel wasn't the only one influenced by the Three Stooges. A fake Shemp is a term that was used in Three Stooges shorts when, after Shemp Howard died, they would use someone and show them from the back to where you couldn't tell that it wasn't him. There are a lot of actors in this franchise who merely show up as fake shemps to portray characters that have already died or turned into deadites. While Henrietta was a much more important role for Ted Raimi, it was also a lot harder than just being a fake shemp.
So Ted, how does it feel to be stuck in that costume all day?
It's inexplicable. It's beyond your wildest nightmares.
As a much younger fan, I had already been exposed to Ash in a way. I had seen the box art of all 3 movies with Ash front and center on 2 of the 3, but also from a video game that shamelessly stole from the ever-changing hero. When Ash gets ready to fight the good fight and is in the work shed, we are treated to him saying his famous line of groovy. I had already been playing a computer game called Duke Nukem 3D and thought the character was an awesome, overly macho dude, but later found out he stole most of his lines from tougher, more fun movie characters. Even if it was in jest from the makers of the game, Ash as a character reaches his midpoint of going from everyman to over-the-top comic book character, albeit one with a iffy moral center and fewer heroic bones in his body than most action figures. Of course, in the pre-DVD 90s, it became my mission to collect the Anchor Bay releases on VHS of the Evil Dead trilogy. The first movie was a gift, and the third movie was a birthday present from my already mentioned brother. But when my family took a trip to Big Bear, California, I still had some money left over from family cards in my wallet. There was a store just before heading up the mountain that sold video games, music, and of course, VHS tapes. When I saw they had a horror section, I headed straight there, and to my glee and surprise, they had Evil Dead 2 ready to be given a good home. While I'm sure it was a wonderful experience to see that particular movie in theaters when it came out, getting to buy it and watch it in a cabin at night was an experience that I will never forget. I've seen the movie in theaters at one of those flashback evenings, but I'll never forget the time I watched my very own VHS copy in a cabin at night. The series is, in fact, a series, even if the plots of all 3 films have things that ignore parts of the other movies. What makes that charming is that each one is different in its own way and lends itself to everyone enjoying them, but having their own movie that jumps out as their favorite. For me, it's Evil Dead 2, which is still fully a sequel even if it feels more like a remake at times. If you look closely though, Sam and company make sure you know it's a continuation and not a remake.
But fortunately, we had the opportunity in the '86 to basically remake Evil Dead with more money, which Evil Dead 2 really is sort of a $3 million, not a, $300,000 version of the same movie.
There are so many great scenes in the film, from Ash going crazy in the cabin after his girlfriend Linda is killed, to becoming a deadite himself, to the comical mischief that ensues when the rest of the human characters get to the cabin. But for my money, it's the scene where he has to take on deadite Linda, both her severed head and her Ray Harryhausen-inspired body. She taunts and berates him, but also switches back to his sweet girlfriend to ask for help. It's got the perfect musical cue and switches back and forth between horror, comedy, and even a little drama. When her body busts into the shed, armed with a chainsaw, we would get a glimpse of the deadites Ash will fight in the next installment. While it's nothing compared to the wall geyser that erupts onto Ash when fighting, or saying farewell as it were to his hand, the scene has everything. That's really what Evil Dead 2 is all about though, right? Even beyond its scenes that have perfect moments, it's kind of the perfect horror movie. It delivers on the gore, some of the scares, action, and you care for the characters enough that it matters what they do and when some of them die. The stakes are high for humanity, and even higher in the immediate moments for our characters. When you think of Ash Williams, Army of Darkness is the final version, but Ash here needed to walk so that a few years later, the character could really run. And I don't just mean run his mouth. Evil Dead 2 is an incredible entry and one of the most important movies of the second half of the decade. When you run into someone who says they haven't seen Evil Dead 2 yet, then properly educate them and make sure they create their own solid memories with this stylish and splattery pillar of the 80s.
On the next episode, we're going to travel back to the fictional town of Santa Carla, a quintessential beach town famous for its boardwalk, carousel, and the sexiest saxophone player you'll ever see in your life. But if there's one thing it has too many of, it's all the damn vampires with the Lost Boys. Until next time, gorehounds.
Hi friends, your humble narrator Tyler Nichols here, and I hope that you enjoyed that episode of 80s Horror Memories. If you missed our previous episode, click over here. If you want to see more from our series, click up here. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Subscribe right here. And most importantly, stay spooky, folks.